Hi, I'm Roger Faulkner, a chemical engineer and a polymer scientist and an inventor. I have ALS. I've been living in a wheelchair, and that's why I call my websites Living in a Wheelchair. One of my inventions fairly recently I call the conformal vest ventilator. It's a ventilator that instead of having something blowing air into my lungs through either my mouth or my nose or both, my chest wall is sucked out, kind of like an iron lung, but it's wearable and conforming to the body. That was what I was working on, and then the COVID epidemic happened, and I shifted my focus because even though I really believe the conformal vest ventilator is important, there's no way it's going to make a difference in the next year to save lives. So instead, I've been working on what I call the shared manifold ventilator. And the short form of this is it's an industrial scale device that would allow ventilation of 100 patients at once. But there's only, one oxygen pressure manifold, one air pressure manifold, and one exhaust manifold. Each of the patients are linked to the manifolds through solenoid valves, and by controlling the timing of those solenoid valves, you can create individualized breathing cycles for each patient. The one thing you can't do is change pressures willy-nilly for each patient. Although if you add a pressure sensor, you can also use the solenoid valve timing to regulate the pressures for the patients. But in any case, the air inlet and the oxygen inlet manifolds would be set for low inspiratory pressure, probably between 20 and 30 centimeters of water, which is between 2% to 3% of one atmosphere. It answers one of the key things. The American Association for Respiratory Care recently advised the public that it wasn't really a good idea to treat multiple patients with one ventilator that was on a shared manifold. But that's based on all those patients having the same breathing cycle. That's not the case with my design. Figure 1 here shows the very simplest possible design. You have a gas supply. It could be an air compressor, it could be oxygen or a mixture. And there's the inspiratory valve, the very simplest design that would open and close to regulate the pressure. The piston can be withdrawn to regulate the pressure. And then there's distribution valves, which are just simple one-way valves going out to each patient. The expiration from the patient would be through little holes in their ventilation equipment, which is the way I breathe typically. But this does not achieve the individuation that's needed. So the next figure shows a better design. In this design, there are 3 separate manifolds. There is the oxygen manifold, the air manifold. Both of those would be set to the same pressure, somewhere between 20 and 30 centimeters of water pressure. And then patient's exhalation would be into an exhaust manifold, which would, in most cases, be set to a slight positive pressure, on the order of, say, 2 to 4 centimeters of water pressure. That little bit of residual pressure helps to keep the lungs from collapsing. And then, of course, the exhaust air would go through HEPA filters before it goes to the environment. And there's a bit more detail I'm not going to get into right now. There's also a third design that might be particularly applicable in places like Africa because it's so inexpensive. That is, you have an air compressor that is maintaining pressure by running continuously. This would be something like a vacuum cleaner compressor or a leaf blower compressor. And then the patients would be getting ventilation off that. The problem with this design is that it wastes a lot of gas. There's a constant flow through the system, and that's fine for an exhaust manifold. But if you're using oxygen, you don't want to be dumping that much of it to the atmosphere. So this figure 3 is mainly relevant for the exhaust manifold portion of figure 2. Okay. So I actually gamed out cost of the components to build one of the figure 2 device. This is designed for 20 patients, and it uses 3-inch plastic pipe for the air and oxygen manifold and the exhaust manifold, very commercially available materials. PVC is okay for oxygen service as long as it's not elevated pressure oxygen. We wrote this in with Raspberry Pi controllers. You probably would have to pick a more reliable controller for a really for a medical application like this. But this is just to give us a ballpark, $3,400 for the parts. And that's where I got the initial goal of $3,400 is from this table. And that's going to be enough money for a first prototype. So I won't be building the first prototype for 20 patients. It'll be for 1 or 2 patients. I'd like to say the shared manifold project is an economically feasible way to potentially save millions of lives. There are numerous ventilator development projects ongoing. But this one, as I wouldn't say unique, there are some other people that have proposed something like this. It takes care of multiple patients at once, therefore it greatly reduces the investment in many of the controls. You know, you have just one manifold to control, but then 100 patients feed off that manifold. So it's applying my industrial point of view to this problem. This manifold ventilator is not going to be suitable for individual hospital rooms, as is the norm in the U.S. right now. It's more feasible for hospital wards or for emergency medical tents. But that's going to lead to a lot of lives being saved, I think. And of course, with COVID, people are going to have to be on ventilation for 3 or 4 weeks typically, and that means a much more capacity than if it was short term. And you can follow the development of this project on my website, livinginawheelchair.com/SMV. SMV is for shared manifold ventilator, and I thank you very much.